Welcome to episode 218, the brilliant global gem called Christel House. And Christel House was shown to me, introduced to me by a gentleman named Seth Walker here at Indiana University about 6 months ago, and said Christel House is interested in expanding beyond their schools in Mexico and India and South Africa, Jamaica, and Indianapolis to go to places maybe like Nepal in the near future, or Kenya, or Colombia, or Peru, or Ghana, or Bangladesh. He knew that I was doing some work with Nepali young children, actually, who are taking MOOCs, and we've had them on the show a couple of times. They've taken massive open online courses, and it was a really interesting show we've had with them, shows that we've had. And so I said, sure, I'd love to talk to them, and maybe we bring them on the show because Christel House is empowering youth. Christel House has served 20,000 students around the world. They empower, they get kids not only educated, but healthcare. And their program is maybe the whole child, I guess. And they'll explain that in a second. We've got David Harris with us, who's the president and CEO of Christel House International. He's up in Indianapolis. He used to work in the Indianapolis government for one of the mayors up there a while back. And he's one of the 40 most influential people of the past 40 years in Indianapolis. So we're glad to have him on the show. He's got many awards. Take a look at the blog post we made on this particular show. Adri Marais, coming to us as CEO of Christel House in South Africa, joined them in 2018. She's a social entrepreneur, is passionate and tenacious, and as a leader, deeply empathetic in terms of understanding of youth and youth education. And Lauren Daniels, who comes to us from South Africa, and she's going to talk about what she's been involved with in Christel House over the past 6 or so years, or maybe it's less than that, and she'll explain that in a second. We also have Paul Montgomery with us. He'll be maybe jumping in from time to time, adding some context. He's also up in Indianapolis. He was my original contact up there. And would you like to take over, David, at this point and explain a little bit more about Christel House? Then we go to Adri and then Lauren, and then we'll back up with us with questions for you. David.
So delighted to be with you, and thank you for hosting us today. Again, my name is David Harris. I'm the new CEO of Christel House International. I've been in the role for about 4 months, but the organization has been around since 1998, was founded by entrepreneur Christel DeHaan, who, after having taken a trip to Mexico, was inspired to create what is now Christel House International. She had recently sold the business that she built and made a considerable amount of money on that sale. And one of her former colleagues in Mexico City invited her down to see an orphanage that he was involved in to see if she might be willing to support it. And she went to Mexico City, saw the orphanage, and said, well, let's do more than just the orphanage. Let's create an entire holistic 18-year school model that will help these kids really transition from the poverty that they were experiencing into successful careers. And the man who made that invitation is still the chair of the board of the Christel House Mexico School that started in 1998. We now have a network of 9 schools in 5 countries, South Africa represented here today, India, Jamaica, Mexico, and the United States. We have served about 20,000 kids since our inception. Right now, we serve about 6,500 kids. About 5,200 of those are in our preschool through high school model, and then we provide supports for our graduates for about 5 years after they leave us to help them successfully navigate whatever post-secondary education they're pursuing and help them secure their first job. And we'll have a lot more to say about the Christel House model, but that's a quick overview of Christel House.
And then maybe we move it on to Adri.
Yeah, so I'm, whereas David's the global president, I'm this, and CEO, I'm the CEO in South Africa. And I think our job there, and at some time we'll talk a little bit more about the full model, but the real job is to understand what it means to have no social capital, to have no financial resources, and within that space to ask yourself, how can you meaningfully make a difference in something that's more concretely holistic, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I've been with the organization since early 2018. When I got a phone call from the very Christel de Haan to say, don't you want to join us? And I thought it was good and timely to be part of a global organization after my previous organization at CIBA Education, where I was for 14 years as a co-founder of a no-fee tertiary institution. And to this day, many of our Christel House graduates actually go to CIBA Education for their further and tertiary education. So it's really how to look at those 19 years that David spoke about and to see how that effectively becomes upward economic mobility. That is the job, whether it's at a local level or how it integrates at a global level.
And Lauren, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Daniels. I was at Christel House between 2013 and 2017. So essentially, I attended Christel House for the duration of my high school career. And I graduated from high school in 2017 and went on to study my Bachelor of Arts in Social Dynamics at Stellenbosch University. And yes, so my experience from Christel House were, like I said, my high school years, which I believe is sort of the most important years for me in terms of just my development and personal growth, just as a human being. Previously, I had attended the local public primary school where I was staying at the time, which was a small township called Delft. And of course, there's always a big jump and a huge transition and adjustment to make when going from a public to a private school. So it was a bit of an adjustment for me at first. I remember those first couple of months like it was yesterday. It was a lot of getting used to just having access, I suppose, and having resources and just trying to figure out my place in that space. But I will say that for a good 5 years, Christel House was and still is my home. And I've had some wonderful, wonderful years there under the mentorship and guidance of the teachers who are absolutely brilliant and very committed to not only their jobs, but to the advancement and development of students. And this really helped me carry on and become a more whole-round student when I was stepped into the university space for the first time. I'm a first generational university student, so I had a lot of have a lot of ground to cover in terms of pursuing my education and being a frame of reference for my siblings who will then carry on and do university themselves. And currently, I'm pursuing my master's degree at Stellenbosch University in public sociology and anthropology. And yeah, that's just a little bit about me in a nutshell.
Well, it's wonderful to have you, Lauren, because often we have a show and we're kind of like contacting the people we're bringing in. Can you bring a student? Can you bring a representative who's gone through the program? We're not successful. Oftentimes we're not successful, and when we are, we delight in it. And so we may ignore David and Adri the rest of the show because we're going to just ask you questions since you know everything. You work for them. You've been part of it. But I'm actually going to go off script here for a second. I have two questions for you, and then we're going to open it back up to my co-host for questions. I have one small question and one larger question. And I'll let everyone think for a while I'm going to ask Paul, who's on the sidelines here. But the larger question I'm going to ask the three of you is about the principles underlying Christel House and why it's successful and maybe how those principles in terms of I'm a learning psychologist, so I'm really interested in principles of learning, but it could be principles related to the foundation for the program that you've built. But Paul, you've sent me a series of articles that you've gotten a lot of press lately. Can you briefly talk about one of these articles maybe and what they're talking about and what kind of press, why are people interested around the world in writing about this? What are they covering? Go ahead and give a couple plugs, Paul.
Well, is there one of the, I sent you 5 different articles. Are you referring to maybe the College and Careers program?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the key, or I would think, I kind of look at it as one of the most unique aspects of Christel House, because as Lauren said, she was in high school at Christel House, South Africa, and Lauren, you can kind of follow up with this, but Christel House stays with the student and works with the student, or the graduate, I should say, beyond high school. Because as Lauren, you were the first one to go to college, correct? Or to university?
Yes, I'm the first one in my family to do so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so the idea of helping guide her and mentor her on how to, the steps to take onto that's probably, like I said, that's the most unique aspect of Christel House, because as David referenced, it's an 18-year program. So it's, pre-K through graduation, but then it's 5 more years after that. And certainly Adri and David can certainly address that as well. But the reason why that program is so special, one of David's initiatives this past year has been seeing if that model, that College and Careers program, will work outside of Christel House. In other words, the idea of taking it to other high schools, and we're doing a pilot program, and certainly David can speak to this. We're doing a pilot program with 4 high schools in the Indianapolis area to see how it works. The idea of having career coaches working with students that are not from Christel House. So that's one of the reasons why we're getting a lot of attention for that, because we're kind of reaching out into, new areas there and taking something that's been working very well for Christel House and seeing if that same model works well for everybody else. David, do you want to comment a little bit more on that?
So one of the things that you asked about, kind of what our principles are, I might reframe it slightly and say, what is our North Star? And our North Star is helping young people experiencing poverty escape poverty. And as a school network, that's a different North Star than is the typical North Star, which is just to produce, I shouldn't say just, but to produce academic outcomes that are positive. That's extremely important, and we care a lot about the academic outcomes of our students. But when your North Star is helping kids experiencing poverty move out of poverty, you think about what your work is differently. And one of the things is we're with our students for 18 years. Because it's a long road to go from being someone who grows up under very challenging circumstances to be able to grow up and become a teacher or an engineer or a management consultant or a dentist or whatever it might be. And we've had graduates do all of those kinds of things. And so we do start at preschool, although different ages, different countries based on the cultures. But we're with our students, as Paul said, all the way through when they get their first job. So that 5-year period after they graduate from high school is often a neglected period in a young person's life that we focus on. And I think it's one of the reasons why our graduates have been so successful. 95% of our high school graduates are either in school or employed today. And just here in Indianapolis, the state of Indiana produced data that showed the average earnings of students based on their high school. And our Watanabe High School here in Indianapolis had the 2nd highest earning of any public high school in the city of Indianapolis, and by far the highest earnings of any high school serving low-income students. And we think it's because we are focused on moving kids out of poverty. So we provide these additional supports that Paul was referencing for 5 years after high school, in addition to the holistic model that we provide for students while they're enrolled in our schools. So in addition to education, nutrition, and healthcare, and early childhood education, and social services, and support for parents, career guidance as they're going through our schools as well. So that North Star that was really a result of our founder, Christel House, being to move kids out of poverty, I think is really a distinguishing feature of our model. And it causes us to think differently about the work that we do and the kinds of investments that we need to make to ensure that our kids are successful.
Thank you for that. I will say that we've posted links to all 5 articles that I was sent. They're up on the blog post. So if someone goes to the blog post, you can read The Guardian, what they've written, Indianapolis Star, Chalkbeat, South African Good News, and something called the 74. I'm not sure if I got that right, Paul. What is the 74? What is that?
It references, it's an online educational publication, but it references the 74 million students that are in school. So
it's sort of like the
you.
conversation or something that way. It's an online education. I've written in it for it. Yeah.
Oh, you've written
We're
everything,
very
Pooja.
prominent here in the United States. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I should know. It's like the evolution or the conversation, I see. Adri or Lauren, would you like to discuss your perspective on the principles surrounding or underlying Christel House? And it could be from the standpoint as a student, as a learner, what do you see as the principles, that I was alluding to, the learning principles, and Adri as an administrator in charge, similar to David, the mission, how can people, as Chris was talking about in the pre-show before we went live, who want to replicate it, who, want to use it as a model or a benchmark for what they're implementing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what has to be in place? What are the structures so this can become scalable beyond Christel House?
Maybe Lauren can give a couple of examples, but I'd love to then follow and put a little bit of our sort of structural theory of change around that. So Lauren, go ahead if you want.
Thank you, Ms. Adri. Yes, so definitely I will be speaking from a a student's perspective, because that was sort of my engagement with Christel House, and also the level at which I received my education, of course. And I think just from a student's perspective, what stood out for me when I first started attending school at Christel House was there was definitely a focus on getting the learners to be the best that they can be. And by that I mean, the classes were smaller. When I came from a public school where there are about at least 50, 60 kids pressed together in one classroom. And that of course meant that the teachers' teaching ability is hindered, because they have to give basically divide their attention between all these learners, and sometimes those outcomes aren't the best, and it's not fault of the teachers, but under-resourced schools typically are overcrowded. And so the first thing that really stood out to me when I attended Christel House was the smaller groups in the classes. And that meant that if I had a question or I was struggling with something, the likelihood that I would be assisted by the teacher was much higher, because they actually are able to give me and dedicate the time to assist me. So that was sort of speaks more to my classroom experience. But the one thing that I will always take with me and have taken with me, even into adulthood, was for me, my favorite thing about Christel House, which is the character development program. I've always been sort of gifted academically in terms of, getting the good grades and performing well in class. But I think that was so greatly complemented and supplemented by the idea that we're also trying to create better people. It's nice to have good academics, but we also want people who are responsible and, go out into the world and be conscious citizens. Because the truth is that one could very easily have opportunities like this and have access to resources in this way, and go out into the world and have a complete disregard for those who are not in that position or didn't have the privilege that we did. And so what Christel House was able to achieve was to provide sort of a safety net and a mold with which we can thrive and do our best, but also to remind us that when we go out into society, we need to be conscientious of helping others and using what we've been given to uplift our communities in that space. And that was, it reminds me of the school credo, giving back to our communities. That is at the core of who we are supposed to be when we go out into the world. And, and what I also loved about it is that it encourages giving back to our communities in a way that speaks to the truth of who we are. Not everybody understands that in the same way. Not everybody wants to do that in the same way. Some of us are musicians and we play at community center. Some of us are artists and we paint beautiful murals in back home in our communities. And I love that we are encouraged to give back in different ways and in ways that play to our strengths. So that is the thing that will always stick with me. And I remember every morning we would start the school day with a thought or a quote, or every month we would have a theme centered around either gratitude or compassion or grit, and we would have discussions just as a class, as a grade, about what that means and how we can implement it in our everyday lives. The other day I was actually cleaning out some of my old stuff, and I actually found the journal that I had when I was in grade 12 with all the monthly themes, and I felt so I wish I could go back. But yeah, it was an incredible experience for me, and I still love to go back from time to time and give back in every way that I can. Being a working professional right now means my time is a little bit more limited, but I do try to, whenever I have a moment, to go back and just touch base and just reconnect with the people who who just made me who I am. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. Before we go back to Adri, let me just introduce my co-host. I forgot to do that at the beginning. With me today is Punya Mishra from Arizona State University, Lydia Kao from the University of Toronto, formerly a postdoc at Harvard, and of course, she had worked with Dr. Christidi at Harvard, who's with us as well. So Adri, would you like to give your perspective?
Yeah, so I think my perspective would lie from where David spoke, and Lauren gave very specific examples of what it is like to be at Christel House and the academic outcomes and how everybody cares and supports, etc., etc. Spoke about character development, and you role model that beautifully. But I think what I want to pick up on is David's point that we spoke, one speaks, a lot of stuff goes about education and educational outcomes and academic outcomes, and the world speaks about education. None of that can happen if education is not enabled. And that is the principle. You asked a little bit earlier, what are the principles underlying the model? The principles that underline the model is that you can't begin with education if you don't have a space, a bit like tilling the soil before you plant the seed. And for us, that would be transport. So we bring our children in, because if they can't bring them in, they can't go to class. If they can't go to class, they can't get an education. It involves food, giving school uniforms, etc., etc. Then we have social care. You spoke about us having health care. There's psychosocial and emotional issues that need to be dealt with. These things are broader than any educational aspect can cover. So you need to really get the person ready, the classroom ready, to be able to do an education. And when the kid gets into the classroom, you will find out that maybe the stomach ache is not a stomach ache, but a stomach ache, or there could be dysfunction in the home. So all of those things, like Lego blocks, we shift around all the time before we get to a point to say, what are the academic outcomes? And that just ties in exactly with David's point, and as Lauren has spoken. And then I just want to mention two other things. Lauren spoke to my heart that we sit so close to character education, but we refer to ourselves as based in character and focused on career. And I think that really bookends the work that we do. You have to be a person of character first, and you've got to grapple with that, as do we in our own meetings. We start off by taking words and grapple with meetings in our own leadership meetings. And then for 18 years, actually in South Africa, it's 19 because we take our kids a year earlier at age 4, we hold the thinking about a career. Because if you come from poverty, your parents, all they're trying to do is survive, get a job, get enough money, feed the children. It's a tough, tough life. There isn't the privilege to sit and say, oh, my child, what do you want to be one day? Or role modeling around a dining room table, that there isn't. So how do we hold that career piece? And not just when you get to university, because there, a bump in the road for anybody else is the end of the road for our children. How to then continue to hold that? So those are the principles within we can then say, what does education look like?
One just quick thing to add for your listeners who may hear Lauren and think she's so exceptional, and she is so exceptional, that we have some sort of academic requirements to get into Christel House. We actually don't have any academic requirements for students entering the preschool or kindergarten. We admit everybody. We have a couple of exceptions. We're not positioned to serve students who have severe disabilities, and we don't serve students who are homeless. But otherwise, we have no academic requirement. We're serving the kids that are in the communities that we serve, regardless of their academic backgrounds, and yet continue to achieve the results that I mentioned. Again, 95% of our graduates are either in school or are employed. 72% of our students have meaningfully moved up the economic ladder. So we're getting these results, which just kind of underscores what we all say, which is that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity isn't. We really believe that, and our kids are proving that that is true.
So we're going to go to Punya with a question. I'm going to jump in here, Punya.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today. And what a wonderful episode. And I want to again second what Kurt said in the beginning. It's always wonderful to have students who have been part of whatever project, that we have. We have had a few episodes in the past, and those are always the most fun ones that I recollect very fondly. So thank you for joining us. So I had a question, and I think thank you again for sort of laying out the broader principles and the North Star that you spoke about. And this emphasis on character and so on. Now you are in many different countries, so I'm just curious because these can become very contentious issues. Like what character means in one context, in one cultural context, might not necessarily transfer. And especially if you are coming from Indianapolis and you're going to India, like who are you to tell us what character is? I'm just making a little bit of an extreme point here. But I think that yes, we can all sort of agree on broader principles that that access is important and that it needs to have all the pieces in place, from transportation to food to whatever. But how it plays out in particular cultural or countries might vary. So I'm just curious how you navigate that. Like that how is it sort of similar but also different? I'm sure it has to be. So I'm just curious to understand that, and anybody can jump in and speak to that, if that's okay.
You're exactly right. We in Indianapolis shouldn't be telling people in South Africa or Mexico or India how they define character. So first, all of our faculty and staff at our schools around the world are from those communities. So we're not having people from other countries come in to lead or be administrators or teachers in those schools. Those are all local people. Christel House International has kind of broad parameters for what it means to be a school, but there's a lot of autonomy that the local leadership has to define the specifics in the school. And one of the questions that we've certainly spent a lot of time thinking about is what exactly do we mean by character education? But at the end of the day, it's up to the local CEOs and their leadership to implement the kind of broad parameters of the model that we have, consistent with what's appropriate for their cultural context, the students that they're serving. And we're benefited by the fact that we have fabulous CEOs across all of our schools, Adri being an excellent example of one. And we really believe, we talk about this term, the principle of subsidiarity. And what that really means is that decisions get made best closest to where the impact is. And we believe very strongly in our CEOs, and we give them a lot of latitude to think about how to implement the model.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, I think that is what we see on a daily basis. You can't be a McDonald's cookie cutter from a distance of many thousand miles, and I think everybody understands that. So we speak of ourselves as exactly the same and completely different. And with that, the conversations will be at a broad level. We will have fierce and lovely, rich conversations around how we are different and how we are the same. And I think one of the wonderful things about having the central piece in Indianapolis, where David is to sort of hold and moderate that in and out, where the subsidiarity is important. One example for us would be one beautiful piece in character education is to speak about curiosity, because you've got to be curious and ask questions, etc., etc., etc. In many of our cultures, the word curious is not a good word. It means nosy. It means you look through people's windows. It means, why are you picking in my business, right? Whereas, for example, in my culture, we were lauded for being curious. Oh my God, she's asking all these questions. So we grapple with those things all the time. And that deep respect that goes across, I think, enriches everybody.
Thank you.
So-
That's very helpful. Lauren, do you want to add something?
Yes, I think one of the things that, from my experience, has helped me, because Christel House is sort of we are sort of a very small community in the context of your school, right? And so by the time you go out and you go to pursue your tertiary education, you are now confronted with diversity in a way that you may have not experienced before. And by that I mean, you're attending classes with hundreds of other people who come from all diverse backgrounds and social understandings. And this particularly became clear to me when we as students in the lecture hall were discussing these topics of diversity and what it means, and how diversity and inclusion aren't always mutually inclusive things. And so what prepared me for that was the idea that just that I think the concept of tolerance that was taught to us in school, the idea that different, number one, is not necessarily wrong, and secondly, that there has to be what Adri mentioned, a healthy respect um, for differences in opinion and differences in thought leadership just across the board. And I think that's what really helps us. And so speaking as a South African, I don't think it gets any more diverse than than the Rainbow Nation. So we've had a lot of practice, and I think that when that paradigm is institutionalized and carried over in a way that was done through, like I said, a vehicle like the character development program, it just helps that much more for young, impressionable minds to understand that when we're confronted with issues of inclusivity and diversity, that we handle it with grace and integrity and respect and love. I think that's.
Thank you so much. And
so
I'm going to hold my follow-up for later, just because I know Chris and Lydia and everybody have been waiting. If we get time, I'll come back to it. But I think, Chris, you are on next. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Punya. So as I listen, I'm reminded of a couple other initiatives that seem similar to me. You can tell me whether I'm on target or not. One of them is called the Harlem Children's Zone. This is an initiative that Harvard has been involved with over time, led by Jeffrey Canada. And it's whole child, and it's community centered, and it's proven a very effective model. It hasn't really scaled, but it's proven a very effective model where it is. The other is an initiative that we highlighted on this show a little over a year ago that I'm involved with, called the Digital School. This is an initiative out of Dubai, and it looks at children who are severely marginalized, for example, in refugee camps or in rural areas that are so rural that they can't recruit a teacher. And how you deliver services and help these children succeed under those conditions. And what strikes me, the reason that I'm throwing out these examples and that I'm going to ask you to comment on them is that we have many models for how within the walls of the school to help children. And Silver Lining for Learning has highlighted a lot of those models, and they're different from one another because their context is different and their missions are somewhat different, but they're all fundamentally similar in terms of knowing what to do. There's not a mystery about what should happen within the walls of the school if you really want to empower the students rather than just program them. But what's more unique, and I'm hearing that in your describing Christel House, is when you step beyond the walls of the school and you say, how do you intervene in the child's life so that you can really maximize their education when the poverty that's happening in their lives outside of school can overwhelm anything that you try to do solely inside of the school. I've certainly talked to very dedicated teachers who've said to me, I work as hard as I can for these children while they're in school, but I'm not getting much traction because their lives outside of school are so hellish that, they just can't. There's limits to what I can do within the walls of the school. So with that long-winded buildup, what I want to ask is, if you want to scale, if you want to open up another school, part of it, of course, is the school itself and recruiting the kinds of teachers and staff that are from the area that can understand the particular context and implement your model within that context. But I'm wondering if part of it doesn't have to be some larger commitment also on the part of the community or even the region in terms of participation actively by different stakeholders, in terms of making certain kinds of commitments that come beyond just the commitments that individual parents make and so on. And I'd love to hear your answer to that.
The Harlem Children's Zone is an extraordinary success story in the United States. And during the Obama years, as I'm sure you know, there was an effort to scale that, and it hasn't been proven to be very scalable. And so I understand kind of the root of the question. I think we think about this question a lot from a few different angles. First of all, as we track students from preschool through age 22, 23, 24 to see what kinds of life outcomes our work is producing, and we can show, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, that our graduates are actually performing very well in their professional lives and are able to support themselves and their families. We hope that is an example of the kinds of things that we should be investing in as a country and as countries around the world. Because if we're going to scale this work, we're going to need to have public investments. That's the only way that that's going to happen. We're encouraged here in Indianapolis that this effort that Paul mentioned to now expand that support that we provide for 5 years after high school, what we call our College and Careers program, we've now expanded into 4 other non-Christel House schools for the first time this school year. And we got significant funding from the state of Indiana to support that. And there is I think, a growing recognition in states around the United States and within kind of philanthropy in the United States and the kind of the education reform community, however you define that the focus on just looking at how students are doing on state assessments is wholly insufficient in terms of evaluating how well schools are doing at the work that we really want them to do, which is to transform lives. And so one of the things that we want to do is to demonstrate, not just in our schools, but in other schools, that if you provide these additional supports and you make these public investments, then you can really meaningfully transform the trajectory of a student's and a young adult's life. And the fact that Indiana has invested in this pilot program that we're doing here in Indianapolis is a small but encouraging step. And that 5-year period we think is, as I mentioned earlier, kind of a neglected area. Those kinds of investments are much less expensive than the traditional full model school. And so as we think about places where we would encourage policymakers to really look about making more significant investments, that's an area that we think is ripe for all kinds of both growth around the United States and hopefully in the other countries that we operate in. But it's also feasible to think about that really being invested in because it's not a huge amount of money. I don't know if Audrey or Lauren, if you have anything to kind of add to that, but
yeah, I mean, just a little thing, because I think there's some lovely other questions as well. But so the whole Harlem Children's Zone, the Jeffrey Canada work, which I'm very familiar with as well, it does speak to the benefits of a level of saturation, and that homeschool nexus is what we refer to in our parent program. One of the things to do is, and we've got very particular areas that we serve, is to try and get a sense of saturation. We have, for example, one of the areas we serve is Langa. We've got 5 buses going into Langa every day. We're currently building a second high school on our premises to be able to double the number of high school people that we serve going to the same area. So we will have eventually 10 buses going to Langa. And if you go into Langa, you see the kids there. They speak to their parents. They speak to their communities. We do some other outreach work there as well. And that is an attempt to sort of try and simulate that saturation piece and cover all the various aspects.
Well, I just want to say that I couldn't agree with you more with this emphasis on investment rather than cost. And it's ironic that when models like this are described, the typical response on the part of people, including people who should know better, is to say, well, that's just too expensive. And in fact, nothing could be farther from the truth, that the cost of jails and prisons, the cost of crime, the cost of an uninformed citizenry, something we're seeing at the moment, all of these things are far worse in terms of their eventual economic impact than investing early in young children and helping them to have equal opportunities. So it's a huge shortfall of economics in education that I read so many articles on, well, how much is it worth to get a college degree? And so few articles on what would it really mean if every child succeeded as a result of our investments in the early years of education. So thank you for the kind of work that you're doing. Lydia, I'll toss it to you.
Just a quick comment, Chris, on that point, just to kind of underscore how much we agree with what you just said, and why when I at the beginning of the podcast mentioned that our North Star is helping kids experiencing poverty escape poverty. If we evaluate the success of our school system based on how students are doing on standardized tests, that's where we're going to put our emphasis. But what we're looking at is we want to see, where are our kids at age 22, 23, 24? Are they employed? Are they able to support themselves and their family? Are they in a secure situation? And because that's the way we measure our success, we've built our program to support that. If our focus was only on how does a student do on a standardized test at one particular point in time, we wouldn't be putting our resources into the years that they after they leave high school, for example. We may not be investing in the kind of nutritional programs the way that we do, or providing supports to the parents the way we do. So what the goal is, we think, is really important. And it's really, I think, one of the great ingenuities of our founder, Christel House, who said, our North Star is moving kids experiencing poverty out of poverty.
I just want to say congratulations on this really incredible work you're doing. And it really stood out to me, this deep recognition that school is more than an academic institution. And I think you have this quote in one of the articles that you shared with us. I'm just going to use this quote because I think it just really convey the message. It says, "School are much more than educational institutions," writes educationist Julian Thomas. "They are hubs for our communities and places where we can bridge barriers to identifying and addressing health, mental, and other risks in our children and their families." And I think this really deep reconceptualization, what it means to have a school and what the functions of school is really important, and definitely important for policymakers to reconsider like where funding should go and exactly what the assessment and what success measures should look like. And so my question for you is, I also see that you have this network of schools across the globe in 5 different countries. I'm just wondering, are there any collaboration, exchange among the schools and the students to collectively investigate or work on something? I'm personally interested in this kind of cross-community collaboration and knowledge building across geographic boundaries. And I think we all recognize that with the kind of global challenges such as sustainability, climate change, all these things really require a collective effort and intercultural working together. And so I'm just wondering whether there are things in your school network that's going on that fosters such intercultural competency and collective citizenship mindset.
It's a great question. We've done some of that. Candidly, we want to do more of that, and we are looking at ways to continue to build the network in a way that allows schools to support each other across kind of geographic boundaries. And one of the things that our colleague Morty Balin recently implemented are peer reviews, where we're actually sending faculty from one school into another school as part of a review of that school process that we think both benefits the school that's being reviewed, but also benefits the reviewer, because they get a chance to actually understand what's happening in one of the schools in the network in a different country. We've talked about doing that with teachers, where we actually would send teachers for a period of time into other schools. And we've talked about even doing it with students in some way. That's not something we've made as much progress on to date as we'd like, but it's an area that we're focusing more on.
And if I can maybe just add to that, and David is right, we talk about it and we should do more of it. And we have had some inter-school connections where, they sort of would Zoom through and have a conversation about a particular topic. And those things are incredibly enriching. What we have done in South Africa, which is not globally, but what we've done in South Africa is we run a project called Simunye. And that means we are one, where our school connects with schools across the wealth divide, from the absolute most elite private schools to schools that won't have running water. So we connect these children across the divide and bring them together to then have these conversations and grapple with certain issues, and then go back and really sort of build that social capital and also share different things. I'll leave it at that because I think there's a lot more questions, but there's some beautiful work being done there.
I just have a quick comment. It's extremely challenging for schools and even within the same network to engage in sustained collaboration, because people have different, especially across country, there's different curriculum, there are different like time zones, and there's different focus and like in the classroom, and as well as like there's certain technological barriers to really have students to feel that sense of connection with the kids from another school. Mm-hmm. So all of that is something that we're hoping to research on and come up with good solutions to really allow school to facilitate this kind of a collaboration, rather than feeling that's something extra that you have to take on, but to kind of really build that into the day-to-day school experience. So it's great that you start thinking about this, and there are beautiful initiatives already going on.
Yeah, and that does mirror what what our teachers tell us. They're so pushed in the classroom on curriculum. And because of the additional multi-tiered support system that we have in place to cover some basic things that you might not necessarily have if you come from a more privileged space. So there are some reality issues, but we're very aware and keen.
We recently had an episode with Julie Lindsay from Australia talking about global aspects of education, with young children. She's been running a series of projects for over 20 years with kids around the world, and actually being a teacher in different parts of the world, Qatar and in Australia, and maybe in parts of Asia as well. I'll send you that. I'll look for the link here. I'll put it in the window here. We need to go back to Punya, I think. But before we do that, Lauren, were you involved? Have you been involved in any global projects working with kids in other Christel House schools, or has been only working with them in South Africa? Have you been exposed to the other schools at all?
Yes, I was. I've had opportunity to engage with beautiful young girls at, I believe it was called the Culver Academy, some years ago. Yes, where there was some kind of, I think, student exchange program of sorts running at the time. And they had come into our school, and we just shared things. We shared music and art, and they basically would just provide us with an opportunity to see, number one, how Christel House functioned and what the model was about, but also it helped to expose us to people from different cultures and people from different places. And yeah, what I value most about that time was that I made friends and connections with people who I still interact with and speak to and follow to this day. And I think that was the first time I think it occurred to me that there's more to the world than just what we know. And I think earlier you spoke about we spoke about the idea that uh, in the Christel House space, the access to resources and opportunities can sometimes be a little bit more insular. And the minute you leave those gates, you are faced with the harsh realities of your world, your home. And so at some point we I think, Ms. Adri, you and I had a discussion, I think, last year about this, where you spoke about trauma-informed care and trauma-informed interventions that take into consideration the psychosocial difficulties that learners from these kinds of backgrounds experience. And I think that what enriches the Christel House model is this understanding that taking a child from an impoverished and disadvantaged place and placing them in the opposite isn't necessarily the answer. The answer is enabling and empowering and helping them to understand how to make this work for them. And I think that's why, for me, the character development program was so important, because it's very easy for a child to come into the space and feel lost and confused and uncertain about their place in this new world. Whereas, there was a concerted effort to help situate and satiate, that understanding of, where you are is not who you are. And yeah, I think what made that so impactful is the exposure to other cultures and programs like Simunie and the Culver Exchange program. And what I love about Simunie in particular is sometimes when you get too used to something, you need a bit of a reality check. If you go years and years at Christel House and you have all these opportunities, it's very easy. We're just human. We often take things for granted. Whereas you have a conversation with someone who does not have that, and you're just reminded that, wow, my purpose here at Christel House is a lot bigger than getting the good grades and showing up every day. My job is to take what I've been given and to help someone else. And I think that's what Simunie has been able to do so well.
Wonderfully stated. I'll concur with what Lydia has talked about, David and Paul and Audrey and Lauren. If you guys do get more involved in the global aspects, global connections, and publish anything there, any articles, please send them to me. I'd be really interested in reading and having my students read about them as well. Punya has a follow-up question to his earlier one. We have just enough time for that, and I'm going to make a comment at the end. I might ask a question, but Punya.
Thank you. Lauren, I just want to just underscore and just how lovely what you just said was, because one of the challenges, I think, and we see that in India quite a lot in my work there, is that as students, you give them the opportunities, then they sort of become misfits in both spaces.
Yes.
And where you sort of feel like an imposter in one space for a variety of reasons, and then you feel not at home in what is actually your home, and that's such a tricky thing to navigate. And I do appreciate the comment that you made there. So I actually have two completely unrelated things. So maybe David, I'll come to you second. So Adri, I'm just curious about your background, because you have a background in biochemistry, and now here you are. So how did that part happen? And so related to that,
For
then,
my sins.
yeah, okay. So I'm just curious about that. But David, like if somebody wants to become a part of this project in some other country, somebody's watching the show or whatever, I mean, is there a form to fill out? I mean, how does that work? How does that start? But I want to go, Audrey, I'm just curious about your sort of background, how you ended up doing this wonderful work.
Yeah, who knows? Life comes your way, but I guess ultimately, sequencing DNA is just too slow. I'm a fast girl, and I like to see output, and I like to see results. But my heart is in social change, and my heart is in education. And I think one sort of gravitates to those things. And why I feel very blessed to lead an organization like Christel House is because I can use all of that. My sort of science brain really informs the way I think and argue. And then you've got your heart, which is about social transformation. And then this business head that says, how can we actually make it work? And I get to do all of that every single day. And that's just fantastic. Thank you.
No, I mean, we are all of us, I think, on this call have done these transitions. I mean, my undergraduate is in engineering, and then master's in design and communication, and a PhD. I mean, none of my degrees have anything to do with the previous one, sort of, right? So I always joke with my wife that I'm going to do my next PhD in evolutionary biology, because that's always been of interest, and I don't think it's taken very positively by her at all. But so, David, coming to you, is there a form to fill out? How does this work?
Well, there are different ways of getting involved. One thing I should mention is that we are undergoing a pretty aggressive expansion plan right now. So we're adding schools in 2026 in Mexico City and likely in Bangalore, although there's a little open question about whether we might go to a different city in India. Audrey mentioned that she's doubling the size of her high school on her Audrey campus in Cape Town, but is also looking to open a second full model school. And we are looking to expand into 2 new countries. We've targeted 6, and we'll pick 2 of the 6. The 6 are Colombia, Peru, Nepal, Bangladesh, Kenya, and Ghana. And we've launched our Global Path Builders Fellowship to find our founding CEO in those countries. We'll pick 2. We've had over 2,300 people apply for those 2 spots. And some extraordinary people. And so that's going to be one opportunity for a lot of people to get involved, both the fellows themselves, but they will be having to build the staffs in those schools. So there will be a lot of opportunities. As I mentioned, we do want the staff from our schools to be from those communities. So we don't have people apply from other countries. If anybody's just generally interested in getting involved in Christel House, please go to our website, christelhouse.org. There's an opportunity to fill out a form to get information about Christel House. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and social media, and I think we will have all those in the show notes, information to do that. And of course, we're always looking for people to provide support for our organization so we can expand the work that we do. We're blessed in that our founder left us with a considerable amount of resources to support our work, but we want to be able to expand beyond that. So all kinds of different ways to get involved. But for people who just are interested in learning more, go to our website, christelhouse.org, sign up for the newsletter, and we'd be delighted to add you and share information about our work.
Thank you so much. Kurt, I think it's back to you. We are at time.
We are at time. I'm going to contact you about a little grant project that I'm working on in the coming year with a former guest of the show, Dr. Paul Kim, who's created a tool for question evaluation, and getting kids to ask higher order questions. We just published something this past week in a journal, and I can share that with you, showing a huge improvement of question asking abilities.
Please
So,
include me. We've got a whole focus on higher order thinking. Thank you.
Paul, make sure you give me everyone's email, and I'll be in contact with you all. It'd be wonderful just to chat about it. I'll be up in Indianapolis talking about it, David. Maybe we can meet, actually.
Would love that. Would love that.
So our next show, we're going to have some heroes on. We have a makeshift change of shows, change of plans, but we had some heroes step in from Taiwan. They are from the Higher Educational Resources for Openness Center, the HERO Center. So getting kids to take massive open online courses in Taiwan. They're part of the Taiwan Open Course Consortium, TOCC. They're interesting projects. I've known about this. I've been trying to book them for over 6 months. So we had this opening, and it's going to happen next week at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. They'll be early in the morning in Taiwan there. So I look forward to that episode. And thank you all. Thank you, David. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Lauren. This has been a great show. It follows up with several shows that we've had. People who are developing their courses this spring semester might put them all together and have their students figure out the themes across them, the principles around them, the scalability of each of them. So thank you very much. And we'll look forward to talking to you in the future.